to react, to respond in an environment of a slowdown. As and when the revival starts, the corporates, the institutions that do the maximum amount of efficiency enhancements in their operations are the ones that will stand out the most. So at this point, I mean, I don't really know how much is it possible to consolidate. As Nirupama mentioned, there's already been a lot. I mean, many committees have looked at this. There's already been a fair degree of consolidation. I'm sure there's scope for more. I mean, as just like in corporates, I mean, it's always, I mean, you have to keep looking for ways in which to merge things. But those are issues that I'll come to later.
How much prudence can be brought to our central expenditure?
Thank you very much, Nirupa and Arun. Thank you very much, and for putting me on the right side of Rajiv. Thank you so much. And I will intend to remain there. Right? This discussion is about India. This is not a discussion about the government. Very clearly.
Which means I have enough time.
I don't know what you intend to ask him or what he intends to say, but let me say what's on my mind. We are in a position, as you're saying, is that we are short of resources, and we must look for every place that we can to firstly know where our money is going. And so congratulations, you really told us where the money is and where it is going. But where do we cut it out? How do we cut it out? So I lived much longer in the corporate sector, and corporations too come to periods when they don't have enough money. And I have been with corporations who have downsized themselves to death. So every time, and the things are still not okay, so then you look for things to reduce. And next year, things are still not okay, and you look for further things to reduce, and very soon, you're out of business. What you need is a place you want to go to and a strategy to get you there. Then with respect to that strategy, you choose what you must have in your budget, what you should cut out, and perhaps more things to add to your budget actually to enable you to get there. And when you think of those more things, you have to look for other things which seem okay, but you should cut them out because they're not strategically necessary at this time. So this is the perspective with which we must see the task that is before us. So I see here, just making some comments on India as general, that, yes, we have a goal to grow the economy to, I hear is 10 trillion, but I noticed in your documents it says 5 trillion still, to 10 trillion. In corporations too, when they set goals to say we are going to be a $10 billion company, that is never sufficient to guide you to what the strategy should be. You have to describe the shape of the $10 billion company. What will it be doing? What will it not be doing? What competencies must it have? And to ensure that you will develop those is where you get your strategy for. So to have a goal for the economy and keep repeating it, it's 5 trillion. You said actually, quite rightly, the nominal is not so important as the real, and therefore let's look further ahead. So let's talk of realities. It's not just the size of the economy. Niti Aayog has put out, which has alarmed many of us. But it's correct that in 2030, the same time, you say, or Niti Aayog says, that correctly, that the freshwater requirements of this country will be double the availability. Okay? So when we are a $10 trillion economy, where will the water be and how will we be using it? Pollution. We talk about now people at the bottom, livelihoods, incomes, sustainable sources of income for them. So in the $10 trillion economy, what will the lives of these people be like? Where will they be earning life? So I come back to some good times, Rajiv, and I have had before, where we had looked at India and projecting India. This is already 14 years ago. And there were 3 scenarios that we developed through analysis of all the facets of India that need to be considered together. One of them was called Pahle India. Another was called Bolly World. And the third was called Atakta Bharat. The Bolly World was the scenario, a paradigm of growth, which is not only India, it's been around the world, which is grow the top line and grow the people at the top. And somehow the whole becomes much better. So that was called Bolly World with the shine on the top. The second one, which was Pahle India, I'll come to, it said to us the analysis that if we did not make a choice to go towards Pahle India, we'd end up in a Takta Bharat. A Takta Bharat would be the situation in which the growth would decline. We were talking that time 8, 9, 10%. It could come to 5%. It has. People would be scrambling for incomes, and there would be a sense that things are not all right as we are feeling now. So to prevent that, there was a goal to go towards and a strategy to get it. It was called Pahle India. And the Pahle India strategy was a bottom-up growth strategy. It was about creating incomes at the bottom, building human capital at the bottom, enterprises, small enterprises strengthened at the bottom, so the economy had a strong base on which the top could also grow, get markets and grow. So I fear that going into another budget exercise, you pointed out, is becoming quite frequent, is looking again, where are we going to cut things out without having a vision of what we aim to be, and the strategy to get there is the missing piece. So since this is Rajiv Kumar and Niti Aayog, I would urge that we first have a coherent vision of what the shape of our economy must be, the steps we must take to make it that, and with respect to that, then say, what are we going to cut in the budget and what are we going to add to the budget also. Thank you.
Thank you. Kumar, you have an onerous task of taking this on now. Partly from the point of view of, the very fact that only one engine is practically chugging along. How do you make the other three engines get along? And second, the one engine that is there, how to make that one engine as fuel efficient as possible so that we can go longer and longer distances and probably faster.
Thanks very much, Rajiv, and thanks to Pahle India for inviting me to this one, a difficult one. But great to be part of the panel. Arun Shabat has always been nice. I must actually first and foremost congratulate Pahle India to have a seminar on expenditure. This is something which is not generally done. Most pre-budget seminars, discussions on budgets, etc., are mostly about revenues and about the revenue deficit and fiscal deficit and so on, and then they grow. And I think it's what they've done needs to be done much more, which is to have a searchlight, actually a very deep, as much light on this part, which is the expenditure part. Because actually that is where, and I'm afraid I don't see a person who is always proposing this, Professor Anand from IIM Ahmedabad, Anand Shukla, I think, Anand Mohan, I forget the name, it will come back to me, but he's been always there, and since very long, he's been emphasizing about expenditure. And also to you, Rajiv, I think, given that they've done this good work, let's talk only about that one engine, and let the two be talked about in other places. I think that will be a better one, because I think that's useful to do. But it's not done very often, it's not done. And I think here, my first comment is that there was, by this government, set up a committee under Professor Bimal Jalan, Mr. Bimal Jalan committee on rationalizing of expenditure. And Sumit Bose, who used to be the Secretary Expenditure, was the member secretary of that. This was submitted, I think, 3 years ago and accepted by the government. And I'm told also that a significant part of their recommendations have also been implemented. But I haven't seen that in the public domain. I think it's important, therefore, to talk about the Bimal Jalan committee being in the public domain and a thorough discussion being made on it. So that's the first. The second part that I would want to is that it's a very good start to talk about how these schemes, how much they are and where do they go and to what ministries they're allocated, etc., etc. I think it's equally, if not more important, to see as to what they've achieved. Because the whole thing about the expenditure is value for money. What's the bang for the buck that you get, and especially for these schemes. And I think it will be, all of us would be pleased to know, I think we get to know that at least in the Niti Aayog now, And I wish Shekhar was here even for this session.
Fourth session.
I know he's there for the fourth session, but and he'll tell you the details. He heads the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office in Niti Aayog, and one of the principal tasks for DMEO at the moment, they do several other things. And by the way, this came about as an amalgamation of the IEO and the PEO, the Independent Evaluation Office and the Program Evaluation Office. And they are, for the first time, have developed a real-time dashboard for all ministries, especially the infrastructure ministries, who populate them, and they then prepare the review, which is presented before the Prime Minister every quarter. That's the intention. It gets delayed or something, but they have been charged for the first time this year to prepare a outcome performance-based evaluation of all these schemes, and they're busy doing that. Last year already we had prepared in Niti Aayog a outcome budget exercise which we had given to the Department of Expenditure, but for various reasons, etc., that couldn't be implemented. But I am hoping that this time when the DMEO is scheduled to finish that exercise, a very difficult exercise, by the end of this month or the middle of next month, it will be time enough for the next budget to look at that performance evaluation and then say that on that basis which are the schemes which need to be now promoted or the others which need to be scrapped and so on and so forth. And I think they will find this very useful, but that performance evaluation is the key now. I think we are shifting towards that. And I think the more we can emphasize that, the better off we would be, because not just the central government, but even more so perhaps the state government is where the rubber really meets the road, and we need to work with them as to how their monies are spent. There's very completely almost like a black box, very often in many states. And I think, and I've just been to several states, and if you ask them about the allocation, all their planning departments are now pretty much, and I know I'm public, but I can say that they're pretty much dysfunctional, if not defunct, and they need to be revamped, etc. So I think it's very important for us to do this. Let me with this. Of course, the schemes need to be rationalized. That was the task that the Committee of Chief Ministers had set itself with the formation of the Niti Aayog. But unfortunately, it didn't really happen because it just simply, what they did was to consolidate the very large number in some smaller number, but all of them remained as it were on the paper. So what is the criteria for rationalization? I would really ask, the people here, all the eminence gathered here to tell us how should, what is the criteria to be used for rationalization? What is the objective function that these schemes are expected to, achieve? Now, they're all in the different, large number of ministries and so on. So that's that's one part of it. Because once you compare across sectors, the objective function, utility function becomes much more complex as to what is that one part that you can compare across sectors. So I think then there is the issue also of the government, central government and state government shares. Most of these are 60-40. For some special states, they are 90-10. And then in some very special cases, the entire 100% is met by the central. Now, should it be 60-40? Should it change? How can these be used as leverage for improving performance at the state level? Now what's happened, I've found in many states, that because the entire allocation of the development, etc., plan, etc., from the Planning Commission has gone, many schemes were taken up by the state governments on the hope that their monies will be coming from the central government. That stopped. These are now they have remained half built, or half completed. What do we do about them? Is there an inventory of such schemes in the system? And if not, who can prepare them? Two other points, and I one, that as far as the overall expenditure is concerned, we don't see a full statement which includes the payables by the central government and their ministries. And that's a significant number, and that very often is now said, and the finance minister has said it, and I therefore can say that she has asked all these ministries to liquidate their payables, because it is now argued that if that is done, then that in itself would be a spur, that itself would be a trigger to start off this third engine can be used in that way. So that's a very important one, and I think every exercise that Pahle India should do in future maybe should add that, to that, because that's really and that brings me to the last issue, which is that, and I've been saying this publicly, because I think there is now time to make the transition from cash to accrual accounting. Because I think the whole incentive structure otherwise remains warped. For those who are managing the expenditures of the government, the accrual is actually what is your real expenditure. We can go into the details, but I think once more, great to focus on expenditure, not things done very often, but I think we need to keep building upon this exercise to take it deeper and to take it also to the states and take it also to the real expenditure that is done and not what may be presented in an account which is based on cash accounting. I think those are the three sort of points that I would like to make.
Yeah, so states is one aspect that we'll come to with very specific issues, because states have their own issues and RBI has another view of how if we rationalize schemes, the states may be, their finances may be in trouble because they depend so much on the scheme revenue. But let's get a sense of starting with Thagat again. How much do you think one can rationalize these? There are 700 of them. There is one view that at least 200 of these can easily be closed or merged, and multiple views going around. That is one. How much should we rationalize? And number two, like Dr. Kumar was saying, that if we do get into this exercise, how do you go about selecting those? What is the criteria on the basis of which this rationalization should be put through?
That's an excellent question, of course. I mean, one part is, I'll tell you an example from Mumbai in terms of the scheme. I mean, so there's a study done by the NGO Praja on Mumbai's municipal schools. The system, there's an alarming drop in the enrollment rate for the Mumbai municipal schools. Yeah. So, and they spend a significant amount of money in the schools, but again, it does not seem to be, because they have spent a lot on infrastructure, they have spent a lot on providing tablets in schools, but that doesn't seem to be working. I mean, they have introduced English as a additional medium of education, because I mean, a lot of movement out from the municipal schools into the privately owned fund. So again, I mean, in terms of as Mr. Maira mentioned, again, you have to be very clear in terms of what it is that you are trying to achieve. One, of course, is trying to compress the total expenditure. Total expenditure is easily about, and it's a worrying thing, because of about 26 odd lakh crores, trillion rupees that the center spends, the total expenditure of the center. Only about 3.4 of these lakh crores goes into what is nominally at least capex. There are many revenue things which are partially in the capex nature. So this skew in terms of the 24 odd lakh crores that is spent on revenues versus the 3.4 lakh that is spent on capex. The other problem in this is, so suppose, I mean, you actually, I'm skirting your question a little bit. So I mean, even if you magically find some resources, either from the revenue side or from expenditure compression, what is the best way to use the savings that you do, the expenditure compression or revenue enhancement that you do? So as Mr. Dr. Kumar mentioned, one part, which is, I think, a real brake on the economy now, are all the payables, the receivables by companies, individuals, SMEs, etc., that are stuck in various programs and schemes of the government. That needs to be facilitated. That's also fiscal cost. You cannot do that. So secondly, I mean, how much would you, I mean, the second stimulus measure that we are talking about is personal tax cuts to a certain segment of income. Is that going to be, but all of these are spends, additional spends. In terms of coming back to the question on what should be, how much can you begin to cut? in a situation where government expenditure is probably the sole engine now, that is still a very large stimulus in the system, it has to be very transition driven. I mean, the rationalization process is constant. So of this 20 lakhs, 24 lakh revenue expenditure, of which Nirupuma's figures mentioned 12 lakh crores is some part of a scheme. How much, I mean, can you afford to do that? And remember, as you mentioned, as Dr. Kumar also mentioned, 42% is the devolution to states. So whatever the center is cutting back, the states are not getting. So that's another measure. Fortunately, till now, the data seems to suggest that till now, in the first 6 months, state fisc has been relatively okay. I mean, we had thought that the states would be quite stressed. The data doesn't seem to, of course, there are variations between states, but overall, states do not seem to have been as stressed as we had feared that they would be.
So the criteria you would like to, what should be the criteria when we go around
criteria is efficiency in spending. I mean, this is the ROE of schemes. I mean, so I mean, again, I do not know. I mean, the outcome budget that's been a novel feature of the budget this year has a very extensive list, 168 pages, detailed ministry by ministry, line-wise descriptions of output and the outcome measure. So again, I mean, the criteria has to be outcomes. It cannot be. There has to be a certain degree of inputs into the criteria of cutting back, of rationalization. But the focus has to be on the outcome. What is it that you are trying to achieve? How much of a social security net would you like to provide? How much of investment incentives would you like to provide? I mean, so what are the various ways in which you can? The first priority is revival, growth revival. Forget about everything else. So what are the key metrics that you know? What are the key spending points that you might need to do? And remember, this is whatever we are talking about is largely still product efficiency. I mean, this scheme merged into that. Together with this, as important in this would be process efficiency, which is something that we corporates focus on. When I mean, how do you increase approval times, reduce approval times, etc. How do you increase how do you reduce turnaround times, etc. So all of that. So process efficiency is as big a component as any of the rationalization schemes the products are.
Mr. Mehra, your thoughts on one, how much do you think we can rationalize these 700 into? What should be the ideal number? Is there something in mind that you have? And how much prudence and how do you rationalize them? What should be those criteria?
So we're using the word rationalize, one sentence twice even, because that's what we like to do things rationally. So the rationale is what we should concentrate on. Okay, the rationale for rationalizing is what we should concentrate on. It was last year, I think, or the year before last year, at the Pahle India discussion on a similar matter, Dr. Rajiv Kumar had asked the question, that time we were talking about a fiscally responsible budget management, whether the budget might be allowed to exceed the 3 point something that was set. And he asked this question, what's the rationale for 3.201? Is there a rationale for it? And I've been thinking, and I think the word is also being many people saying, that governments have been budgeting for financial markets. I think governments better recover the ability to budget for citizens. So this FMRB number comes out of budgeting to please a financial market. It's not what's going to produce results for the citizens. So when we talk also about reducing, I'm saying, going back to the reference, maybe we might allow ourselves to spend more, but provided there's a rationale for spending it on the right things. And so you're going to ask me, so what is the rationale? And I'm going to say what the rationale is. So I say, coming back to our Pahle India description, that building up the capacity of human beings in this country, which is our biggest resource, potentially, as well as small enterprises into which they first go. We don't have an option of getting into the big ones. We don't have them now. So building the capacities of people and small enterprises is what we should aim for. That's the vision of the Pahle India economy that we had developed at the time. Now to do this, at a time when we are saying is that the money isn't enough, what should we do? And I would say, I'm just sticking my neck out, that in this year, when people are hurting, And even companies can't sell enough of basic stuff because people don't have incomes and savings. Any schemes which are of the sort of giving incomes to people for work perhaps, like Manrega, extending that idea into urban sector as well as into the small scale sector, to pay people for productive work. And the government is paying it or subsidizing it so that demand starts to grow and people are at work and learning and earning at the same time. This must be done. Any of our expenditures for health and education, even if the scheme is bad, you can drop the scheme. But this is where the output-outcome thing comes. If you look just from the point of view of efficiency of the scheme, you might take out very inefficient schemes, but are targeted towards the right outcomes, and leave in place very efficient schemes which are not doing things which are absolutely necessary at this time. And so, yes, we should look for weeding out, as we say, needless expenditures and inefficient expenditures, but the reference must also be there always. What is the outcome we really want? And if, for example, some education schemes are not delivering efficiently as compared to another, we better find another education scheme to produce the outcome. So this is where strategic thinking and innovation must come in government thinking. It's not a counting exercise only.
Dr. Kumar, you have a number in mind when it comes to the number of schemes that India must have, and again, what do you think would be the best way to achieve the desired outcome? There are some very interesting thoughts that Mr. Maira came up with. Saugata also came up with some very fascinating thoughts. How would you put this together if you had this?
The straight answer to your first question is no. I don't have a specific number of how many schemes should be there. And I think Arun has made...
How much should the rationalization be? To what extent?
That's a bigger question, and let me come to that. But I think Arun has made a very practical, very good suggestion about that human resource development is a key. And I would add to that, within that human resource development, really often is seen to be only as education at different levels. But for me, the topmost priority now is nourishment. Nourishment and health, because the point is that even if after Ayushman Bharat you've covered the sort of the bottom 40% of the population, and the top 5% is actually taken care of by other means, whether it's a CGHS or EHS or their own, because they're wealthy, etc. But between that 40 to the 5, there still remains a 55% population, which is uncovered. And just yesterday we had this fascinating discussion on he just released the health report, and Mr. Gates was there also. But for these 55%, they are incredible number that all of them, so many, they have not even, they don't even interact they interact individually with individual suppliers. So they have no bargaining power, they have no knowledge, so you need to pull them together. So that's the other part of it. So I think what he had said earlier also is valid, which is that we could establish some 2, 3, 4 broad objectives of our economy. People, I would, for example, say human resource development, employment, exports, growth. Let's just put it like that. Environment and water. Now, you can keep on, but there is some prioritization that you need to do in terms of overall expenditure, and then see as to how these schemes contribute to those objectives. I think that's the way to do this, and this does therefore require for the fact that you can't, that you need to have, whatever you call it, a vision or a blueprint or some, not a plan. The plan is a spurious exercise and a spurious quantification, which doesn't really work. But let me raise a bigger issue, Rajiv, with your permission. You see that Saugata mentioned that we spend 26 lakh crore today. Now that's about 12-13% of our total GDP, something like that. I think we need to ask this question here and everywhere: is that enough? Is that what we want to? Is that what will get us to being what we are? In the sense of, in terms of our equity, in terms of our growth, in terms of employment, in terms of welfare, whatever you like to call it. Is that enough? Now the question therefore is that My answer is it's not. Because we need to ramp this up. And then therefore the issue comes as to how do you want to do that, because even with this you've got a fiscal deficit situation which is, 3.4 is just a number in some sense. So, so how do you handle this? So I think this is where I would like to raise to you the issue that we need to now start looking much more at all the three levels of the government. The central, state and local. And then in local you have the urban local bodies and the panchayati raj institutions. How are their how are their finances doing? What are they expending? What is now? And I give you one. There are only two urban local bodies, I believe, Pune and Indore, who actually floated their own bonds. And none else. But if you look at China, a large number of their local governments have now municipal bonds and so on and so forth. Why am I raising this with you? Because unless you improve the finances of the next two tier of the government, then what you do is constantly have a rise in the central government borrowing requirement. And that then becomes, that then what we say that, that the financial markets don't take lightly to that, and they therefore downgrade your rating, credit rating agencies, etc., etc. But if you borrowed or if you improved your quasi-sovereign, fiscal situation, then you'd be in a much better position. Now, let me just therefore end by one number, that unless you do this, you will never be able to improve your debt to GDP ratio. It's at the moment 54% in India. Vietnam is 131%. I think Korea is 147 and China is 206. I'm not saying that you go to 206, for God's sakes, 54% of debt is nowhere in sight. So how do you improve that? Now this is where I think we need to, one, look at the three levels of the government and focus much more on improving their fiscal, accounting, fiscal reporting, fiscal, the whole part of it, and then some of your agencies and departments. Now, which is again where, for example, there was, I forget which committee this was, but the whole suggestion for revamping railway accounts, which are done in their own, completely in their own manner. And people have talked about, so similarly there, and greater accounts. So quasi-sovereign borrowing, debt to GDP ratio, getting the sense of, getting a much better handle on where and how these, how their fiscal position is, and then and I think these are probably more important than to set ourselves these bigger targets of where the monies would go. That will also happen. And if you do this is the nitty-gritty, and which will then lead you bottom up to the bigger question as to how much do you want to go from 13% to what, and then where do you allocate? I think all of these things, and none of these issues unfortunately are discussed as much as they should be in the academic world. And I think this is why I hope that India will be able to continue working on these issues.
Thank you. See, Rajiv has highlighted, and I want to highlight it further, bottom up. He said so, okay? The bottom up. He's talking about like cities should be viable systems, yeah? Delivering benefits to the people, the real benefits that people want, and become financially viable systems also. In fact, the first is a requirement for the second. You have to make a system viable, delivering what people really want, and therefore they pay for it and their health improves, etc., etc. And then the system becomes financially attractive and viable also. Throughout the world, as he's pointing out, wherever there has been growth with satisfaction of people, that the growth has been for them, like in China, local governance is very strong. Local governance is very strong. We think of China as, just a communist party there, but they've been very clear that unless locally people are satisfied, they are in a politically dangerous position. So they always are ensuring that the local delivery is very good. And local officials are charged to ensure that citizens are satisfied locally. Okay? Now, in our situation in India, we have known this from the time of our constitution, that India has to be managed, it's so diverse, so large, bottom up. And so we said, of course, that we made it sound too romantic, perhaps, that is in the villages and manage the villages. It is right, actually. And then we came into the 73rd and 74th Amendment and said that, okay, the cities also should be locally managed, as well as a reminder once again that the districts and the villages too. But we don't do anything about it. Now, my experience, my few years in the predecessor committee or in the planning commission, that this was pretty clear, that we have to find, if you will, schemes that enable capacity to be built on the ground. It doesn't take much money. And if you get schemes which build, or some program which build capacity on the ground, then the management of your budgets and production of the outcomes are going to be the right one for the citizens also. So this ability has to be built. And I say again, it is a very small thing. Our central schemes and the urban sector with which I used to be, all schemes had a 2% allocated automatically for building local capacity. It was never ever or hardly ever spent. Because it's very soft things and we concentrate on the big things and then they end up, as you said, stuck projects and bad things. So please, let us focus on, when we talk about human capabilities and talk about local governance capabilities also. And the sooner we do it, the sooner we're going to come out of this downward Atakta Bharat into which we are sliding. Thank you.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I mean, just following up on this on the bottom up.
Just to say, because Jarun and I had worked on it together 14 years ago, you're not yet sliding towards Atakta Bharat. Just to put it on record straight. We can talk about it in another seminar.
Rajiv, sometimes I think, as they say, admit that this is not good enough.
I know.
And therefore, so the choice of words is okay.
Yeah.
We can't be, and that is why we're discussing things here.
Correct.
We cannot let things continue the way they are. That's what we are Atakta, we are sort of stuck in something.
Yeah.
So what else in the bottom up, I think we are in a very happy situation. I think one of the great things that this government has done, I'm following up from the previous government, but I mean intensification, is the amount of data that we have. I mean, the GST database, I mean, this is for us to use. I mean, we have virtually real-time information now on economic activity, whether that's creating frictions, problems, etc. But we potentially have the ability to design. Look, the government is probably, certainly, the largest procurement agency in India. No corporate comes close to anywhere that the government does. Imagine the amount of efficiencies that you can generate out of just-in-time provision of all the materials to local schools, local government, the food supply programs, etc., based on the data. Where is offtake coming in from? I mean, stock that. Something is not moving there. Why is it not? So you now have potentially the data to be able to, data and the tools to be able to do real-time monitoring and then design your programs and bring efficiency out of the system.
Yeah, that's one of the things, and then I'll come back to the issue of building human resource capabilities, because that's where the maximum investment is happening. I would like to understand, in the context of local governance, what kind of an efficiency MGNREGA, Manrega can be put to in the context of local governance, because nothing can be done better in human resource development than bottom-up approach, as you were starting to say. So Manrega, we know, is a hugely successful program, not very not taken up very actively initially, but I think now the government also recognizes the potential and the ability of Manrega. So let's take the most successful program, and can we make this better, and how? Also, whatever we can do to do it bottoms up, as you were saying, from local level. So, Bhattacharya, you'd like to start with that, and then come.
Again, I mean, these are again very. I mean, there are multiple committees that have studied this, starting from 2011 committees. So again, I think pretty much you know what needs to be done. The more difficult part is how to go about doing this. And remember, this is not just an accounting exercise. This is not an economic exercise, a financial exercise. There's a huge political economy behind this. So I mean, you cannot ignore. I mean, there are multiple competing demands for the states. again, from an economist perspective, as in everything, in all successful programs, I mean, the structure of incentives that need to be built in, whether it be the transfer to the subnational entities, and the behavior of the sovereign itself, I mean, the central government itself, I mean, the various programs. How would economic agents be incentivized? So not just hand out money for, I mean, this is the skill that needs to be developed, etc. The outcomes, I mean, so, I mean, continuous monitoring, etc. And the good thing again, I mean, coming back to this, because monitoring is a very data intensive activity. So, I mean, the ability to monitor now with targets that are thought through very carefully. People talk about big data, big data. So one of the things that I have figured out that, I mean, it's big data, you can easily hire people. It's the questions that you ask. I mean, the same objectives what are the objectives that you are seeking? So that will determine, I mean, what is the minimum threshold for something that, I mean, and benchmarking. I mean, these programs are available for other countries. There are examples that are now available. I mean, it would be, I mean, I'm not saying it's a simple exercise, obviously, because it would have been done otherwise. So political economy, use of data, benchmarking, I think you can generate a fair bit of efficiencies in the system.
Yeah, let's take with Manrega, as you said. It's an example of something that this country has got in the right direction and by and large getting it right, by and large. Can we improve it, and can we then take the principles and apply them more broadly in the country? Well, firstly, Manrega principles are what? That a person will get paid provided the person works. So it's not like universal basic income which is just handed to you. You have to work. And there's a reason I think that if people are at work, they can build a skill, they can build themselves further. So it's got that principle, you'll be paid for work. The second was that you would be part of some work which produces a public good. Now the choice of the public good quite often has gone wrong. But in many, many cases in Manrega, the best ones is where the local community wants that done, whether it's a water conservation or some road connecting to places which are not connected. So this is where the local governance comes in. The choice of what this government goal is going to be used for, in which people are going to be working, is a collective choice, and this is what China does very well actually. So this is what we must continue to apply. Now extending this, you can go into outside the rural areas, into urban areas, where also we have many, many needs to improve infrastructure of cities, to organize social service deliveries in cities. Again, there are people looking for work, young people. Pay them and let them do socially useful work, which is chosen not by somebody saying, here's a standard scheme and the standard things that you can do, but these are things which are chosen to be done. So those are the principles to do that. Then you come into people say, skilling. And I think we got skilling all wrong in this country. By saying we have some massive programs which are offline, without people being at work, skill them, and somehow there'll be jobs ready for them. And when there were jobs, also people said the skills were not the appropriate skills. Skilling has to be finished, if not developed, on the job. This is from manufacturing, we've learned it for years, okay? And we got over this very smartly by saying, somehow about some computer is going to learn how to work a machine. It cannot be so. So the small enterprises, which are the engines of growth, they do need more technology and more skills. They individually cannot afford to have a theoretical instruction to their people, nor to dedicate a machine on which a person is being trained a few hours. They need every machine to be producing. So how do you do this? So you come to, but applying the same principle, that the skills will be developed when people are doing some real work. So they will be working in small enterprises who can't afford to give the other polishing of the skill that's required or the development. So in the clusters, and this is happening elsewhere in the world, and we could do the same, that in the clusters, the people are at work, and few hours every week, they go to a theory thing or some upgraded CNC machine, which is provided for, again, I'm saying by government, right? Because people don't have it in the small enterprises. And in the best examples, even in our country, the small enterprises are willing to pay for that. They can't afford the capital of it. They need it. They're willing to pay for it. So as we start conceiving more creatively, bottom up, building up the capacities of people at work and using their work to build assets which we need, I think we have a strategy here.
So we have one, Manrega, very good, lot more can be done. A lot more can be achieved in Manrega. I mean, if you look at the details of it, I think much bigger bang can be achieved with what we've got there. And hopefully also raising the size of Manrega is not going to be a criteria for its success, because Manrega is finally about people who are not finding employment elsewhere. So that's, and I think we should keep that in mind. On what needs to be done again, the how is very important, and there is a wonderful model at the moment which is going on, which is the aspirational districts thing. 112 districts that we have now selected, 49 indicators broken down to 92, monitored on a real-time basis all the time by Niti Aayog, and then competition within these districts, because we are incentivizing as to who is improving better and so on the delta, on the not the basic level but the delta, because that's what the key is. But I'm mentioning all of this simply to say that what we have discovered there is that the biggest thing is convergence. Now, and I've learned this also in a real way, because I've adopted 2 villages very selfishly, because in one of them, near one of them, is a farm that that we have very small numbers. And once you had those meetings at local levels, you realize that the district magistrate, poor girl, we did not have any idea of how many officials there were, even at the block level or the tehsil level or the SDF level, etc. Now, but the fact remains that unless you get that convergence there, so whether it's, for example, Manrega funds, now whether you want to use that for improving the local school or the Anganwadi or the A&M worker or the pokhara that you want to deepen or dredge the river and get some sand out, etc., or you want to do some natural farming, you don't know. Then there is a Krishi Vikas Kendra, 712 of them. Now they should be brought into the picture somewhere. So the biggest thing I think is that an aspiration districts will probably set up a model which can then be replicated across the country in all the 720 odd districts as you would have, is that how to get that level of convergence at that. And then again, I repeat myself, but I think it's important that the Panchayati Raj institutions and urban local body students have to be strengthened. And there must be much greater effort at the moment, given to their working. And I think that's one scheme which can be added, which is a scheme to launch. And I think, but what Saugata has been saying is very important. There is massive amount of data, and finally the technology is there for you to be able to harness that. And I think the sooner we do that, the better off we are. And some of it is happening. Final example, that all the 11 lakh Anganwadis now are going to be connected to the dashboard in the Ministry of Women and Child Development. 4.5 lakh have already been connected, and they report on a daily basis. And those women thankfully don't have to maintain the 12 ledgers now. They can put it all on the app, on the tablet. But only 4.5, 7.5 still have to go. And I've been looking at UP, hardly 28% of the equipment has been procured. But that's the way to go. And once you do that, technology enables you to monitor, hold accountable, and hopefully encourage convergence, which is what we need, because the number of schemes that are there at the ground level, I don't think anybody in the district administration has a count of it all. Maybe somewhere, but we need to get that done.
Right. So now coming to I'll leave about last 10 minutes of the time for questions, so that the panel can. Okay, why not? We'll give it. Maybe we have about 15 minutes. So if we can take one last distinct question to the panel on states, because that's a very critical component of managing expenditure. Now, RBI states have their own view about the schemes. They would prefer money coming into their funds not siloed, but as one composite number, and they consider this way of tight expenditure slightly difficult to manage. So, how critical are states in this, and how can we get the states around and get them to participate in this, because they have their own financial constraints as well. So the last question to the panel on the states, and then maybe we could throw it open for
Then we will have no time. Coming to that,
we'll have about
For the question
5.
answers, you don't want to give time.
We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, we'll do it very
I
quickly.
will leave that one solution. So many people.
Let's not waste time on that.
Yeah.
So states are very important, critical, have to be done. Niti Aayog has adopted the position that the only way to get this around is to start naming and shaming. Because in our structure of comparative federalism, in our federalism, they are sovereign in many ways, I mean, all quasi-sovereign for sure, and they will not stand to have. So naming and shaming across a number of sectors could be the way forward to get them going. Finally, you will be surprised to know that the states now want tight funds and don't like the idea of that whole thing being devolved, but then they are under pressure to increase revenue expenditure, which is what most of them have done.
I would just quickly urge again that, look, we talked about bottom-up and convergence at the bottom. The solution for effective use of money to produce benefits that are really required is bottom-up governance. The states are in between. So we keep saying, giving from us to them. If you start the other way, and large states particularly have to be, or even the small ones, governing bottom-up. So this should be the governance paradigm that we are going to be encouraging, to do it in that fashion. The aspirational districts is proving it, that when you do it in that fashion, the convergence also happens. So universally, when you talk to the SDGs, and we are talking about similar problems here in India as the SDGs are, it's come to a conclusion by looking around the world that we must have local systems solutions to global systemic problems. And we have been too much in our country expecting the top to find solutions and that there'll be convergence there and no wastage there. I'm a scientist, but physicist, it's not possible in systems design. It will have to be encouraging local system solutions by empowering people locally to make the convergence between various things happen and let the money from the government then suit what is required each place.
Okay. Yeah, for you.
Anand?
I'm Jen Chopra. I'm a combat veteran of 4 wars, but I have corporate experience at the top.
Okay.
I've got 2 takeaways today. One, local governance. You have talked on nothing but local governance and bottoms up. As a common sense guy, I would say yes, this trickle down business never works. But I want to get back to local governance. Today, in local governance, it's not satisfactory. If I take water, jal, I take electricity, infrastructure, unfortunately, it's getting politicized. We've got the center and the others here. I mean, there are 2 ministers saying pollution is bad. The chief minister says, no, everything is okay. Now, what I want to know is, data, you've congratulated us, and technology, yes. How do you get the local governance to function? One, you have better officials, give them incentive that unless you work at the local level, I'm a general. I couldn't become a good general unless I was a soldier. And finally, politicians, that's our fault.
Yeah.
We don't elect the good guys, you won't get the good results. And last, this is expenditure. More money is not the answer. You keep on giving more money, it'll go into your pocket. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are actually talking of managing expenditure. Yeah, broadly. Yeah.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar. So this Manrega scheme is a tag-bound scheme or it's just a bottomless? We are putting such a huge amount, it is going nowhere. Why not to make a result oriented so that barren land, unirrigated, unutilized land can be utilized or river can be done so that it can be used for some fruitful purpose?
Sir, my question is desalination. Since we are talking about expenditure, this is one area where useful expenditure can be made. Let us take 2 places like Chennai and Mumbai, and let us increase the water availability by desalination. Let us know how much we spend per, let us say, 1,000 liters of water. I remember very well that when we talked...
Got it.
Just one
Yeah.
second. When we were thinking of solar power, to start with, it came very costly. But when it came to practice slowly, the rates have come very reasonable. So this desalination issue may...
Okay, so we have 3 questions before we move to the others. Anybody wants to take up? I don't know how much expertise we have on desalination, but let's take up local governance, MGNREGA, Manrega, and whoever has has interest in desalination if we know anything about it. At least I don't know anything about it.
On local one, General Job, I think we talked a little more than only local government. You said that's the only thing we talked about. So we did talk about it. We talked about many things. But local government is important, and the strengthening of the local capability, I think, is the key going forward. And I should emphasize that. I think that's the on Manrega. I myself said that it has to be a part of the converged plan at the district level, and this government is actually doing it. It is actually in aspirational districts. We are now beginning to use Manrega funds to meet the targets, and the DM is actually doing, because as soon as the DM gets to, she knows that there is this pot of fund, and this is where she can be used to improve the standing in the aspirational district. They're doing it. So Manrega is becoming a part of it. I said myself that increase in the size of Manrega is not a sign of success. So therefore, it's not going to be a bottomless pit. It never was intended to be. It won't be.
Is it 10 out
Or in desalination, lots is being done already. We got now Israeli technology, etc., which is much cheaper. You can have solar powered desalination plants, where the costs are not high. Only point, sir, is that in a country which receives as much rainfall as we do every year, there is it's a real pity if you're going to having to go to desalination. The amount of water, 80%, no,
they guzzle power
90% of water just goes down into the ocean, from which we want all sorts of things. Water, come on, I mean, water is we've got to have a very different approach towards water than we have at the moment. And Israel was different, huh? There was water enough for 50,000 people there, and now they have what, 14 million or something like that. We're not Israel. Let's try and look at water differently.
And it's so much more power hungry, so it takes up too much power. Ma'am, you'd like to ask something?
My name is Gauri, and I'm a former Secretary, Labour and Employment Government of India, and I'm the member of the Public Affairs Selection Board. There was some very interesting points which were raised about bottoms up, convergence, and states taking ownership. And my question is that, are we looking at the wrong end of the stick? For a long time, we have looked at it from the prism of the departments. We have tried a result framework document, we have tried outcome budget, we have tried consolidation, we have tried rationalization, and now, I think in frustration, now we are talking about universal-based income. My question is that if certain states want to take the initiative to have convergence of all schemes, so you were talking about convergence, that the district magistrate doesn't know what sort of schemes, collector doesn't know what schemes, how can a poor beneficiary know? So there are several states which are now have this right of citizens to public services, and if they want to go to the next step of converging all the schemes for an individual, it could be an urban local self-government body or panchayat or individual or anybody, any beneficiary, would Niti Aayog be willing to support these state governments through putting the ministries here under pressure to comply with the requirements of falling on a common platform? Thank you.
Okay, sir.
My name is Arvind Pari. I am from Ekrisar. While consolidating the central schemes or rationalizing the expenditure, we need to see the environmental footprints. But when we look to the fertilizer subsidies or the power or irrigation subsidies, will the political dynamics permit it to go in that line?
Okay. Yes. Yes. We'll take three at a time and then we can put to the panel.
I wanted to address my question.
Yeah, my name is S.N. Sharma. I am former director from Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, and I was involved in the Manrega scheme right from 2006 up to 2014 as a national level monitor of the Ministry of Rural Development. The best thing when the scheme was framed and approved by the cabinet was 15 lakh rupees was given to each district to make the perspective plan of that particular district, covering all the villages, all the panchayat, of the resources available, whether it's water, whether it's agriculture, manpower, everything. And very big booklet. And the task was assigned to IIT, IIM, the best brain in the country. And they brought out a very big perspective plan. Unfortunately, what happened? Nobody looked after that perspective plan, and the scheme at the panchayat level, block level and district level was approved randomly, and that is why the outcome which was supposed to come after a year or 5 years, they were not achievable. And I have yet to see a village where anybody parvar family says that I have been given 100 days work.
Okay.
Although this is very unfortunate.
Got it.
So there
So
need to
the
be
pressure on the states pressure on the states is one question. Yes.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if there are states who want to converge, we will be the first to support that. And I've been myself talking to the states about creating district level plans or converge plans and so on. But we need to revamp the whole planning, and it's a department there to be able to achieve that. We are trying to do that under the rubric of the SDGs, because Niti monitors that, and we are trying to set up now SDG monitoring capabilities, which will then hopefully become this platform for convergence. So we'll do whatever. I mean, there are states who want to. Second, on environment fertilizer subsidy, the government is very conscious of this. We are already, experimenting with direct benefit transfer of fertilizer subsidy to farmers, and therefore also trying to get the balance right, etc. But for me, the most important thing that's happened is the Prime Minister's endorsement to the whole idea of the zero budget natural farming. He's now done it thrice. I'm a great proponent of it. I'm trying to push it as far as possible and as quickly as possible, because that would mean chemical-free fertilizer agriculture in this country. And it has worked. 30 lakh farmers are doing it. Please visit Andhra and you will see the success of lakhs of farmers practicing it. That's the way forward, not trying to rationalize. On the last one, on the district plan, yeah, so nice books don't make a plan, but the point is that that's the problem, and which is what we are trying to change at the aspirational district level, because we are trying to actually get the DMs to put down on paper what they would want to do to make their district go up and achieve the national average. First the state average and then the national average across the 49 indicators that we have set for them. So very clear KRIs, very clear, competition, incentive structure, and therefore that is what was required to get your, wonderful idea implemented.
I just want to endorse that. Also being familiar with the Manrega and then trying to apply the same principles as I said to an urban planning, then looking around the world with the help of the World Bank and others about how is bottom-up planning well done and when is it badly done. This shift from plans made by experts to plans made by the stakeholders participatively is the big shift. And this is the thing we're talking at the top. Should the plan be made by a planning commission or the Niti Aayog, or should it be made by the stakeholders involved in that system there who know the trade-offs between effect on livelihoods, environment, etc. in their place? So these methods are the ones to propagate, not expert-made plans which then people are expected to implement. And so here in the aspirational districts, I think I must endorse, we must distill the right lessons from it also. Because we can very easily say the district magistrate made the plan. In every case, he'll sign off. But how was the plan made? And in some cases, it is made the right way, therefore the results are there. And we miss the point. So we must look to a hypothesis. What are we proving? And one, of course, say, don't need to look here. We looked around the world and found that when systems problems are solved by the stakeholders of the system together, the system becomes much better all around, whether it's water, livelihoods, the condition of the economy, all together. So how do you plan participatively? And the plan is owned by the people who have to do it.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this panel. I'm sorry we can take up with the panelists on the sidelines with tea. But I'd like to thank my panelists. Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Thank you, Mr. Maira. Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Thanks so much for your time. Lots of takeaways from this, especially around how do you rationalize the scheme, the rationale behind that. Lots of takeaways about bottoms-up approach to management. The very fact that capacity building can be done through human resource building. Very, very interesting takeaways from this. Thank you so much for your time, and I do hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Please do join us for some tea and coffee, and copies of the report are available outside. Thanks.